Morning. So today is Wednesday, our general topic day. So today I chose continuation of what we were talking about Saturday in our retreat. The first step on the ladder of Ahimsa is Yam. And in that ladder also there are 5 sub-steps. And the very first sub-step is Ahimsa. So we're going to talk about Ahimsa today. So in a yogic tradition, the word for non-violence is ahimsa. Non-violence. When you look at the literal meaning of ahimsa, it means not hurting, non-killing, non-damaging. But none of these phrases accurately captures the concept of ahimsa. Ahimsa means non-harmfulness at every level of existence. There are injuries at the level of philosophical, ideological, spiritual, as well as physical, verbal, and psychological. So that means that ahimsa means non-violence at all these levels simultaneously. All of them. So the most obvious violence is physical. When a person becomes violent and hurts others under certain psychological conditions, that means that violent person is psychologically ill. So physically, you cannot hurt anybody unless you are mentally hurting. At least at the moment of violence. So that's why they say the physical violence is the outer manifestation of the subtle violence that we carry inside us. And we often fail to acknowledge because we are so busy in the outer world, we just don't acknowledge what's really happening within us. In some ways, physical violence is easier to contend with than verbal or psychological violence and actually be less damaging because physical abuse is immediately visible and it is likely to be brief. Because either a person who is committing the violence often realizes his or her mistake. And usually this kind of a realization is enough to snap him or her back to a quasi-normal state. Or the person who is being attacked will attack back or move away, depending upon the state of mind of that person also. But verbal violence is less tangible and probably it will continue longer. Physical violence harms the body. The verbal violence affects a deeper level of being. The mind, the emotions, and the spirit. and the effect is very long lasting. That's why they say the wounds inflicted in a physical fight can be treated with antiseptics and bandages, but the wounds afflicted by speech are not visible. So it cannot be treated that easily. But verbal violence is rooted in mental violence. Before we hurt others with our speech, there must be a violent thought in our mind. And these violent thoughts are the result not of intellectual analysis or proper thinking, but rather of our emotional outburst. Because momentarily the person's faculty of discrimination, the vivek, has been left aside. Repressed emotions are the ground for mental violence. And in that kind of a mind, verbal and physical violence germinates. And violence at a psychological level originates in the form of a negative thought, such as hatred, anger, jealousy, or even the desire for revenge. But violence also takes a philosophical or ideological form. People who are fully convinced that their ideas are the only authentic ideas, they may not only attempt to impose them everywhere, but very openly, vehemently condemn the ideas of others. They put down other people. This is often seen in the disputes between two scholars, philosophers, or even teachers. A religious crusade is an example of ideological violence. And spiritual violence is also common. Taking the truth for granted. Spiritual teachers sometimes misguide their followers. All these forms of violence are common among human beings. And this is all anti-yoga. Because person hasn't even stepped on the first sub-step on the ladder of yoga. Scriptures say that humans and animals have four qualities in common. The four primitive urges of hunger, sleep, sex, and fear. Ahar, nidra, bhay, maithunam cha, samanam etat pashubhi naranam. Dharmo hi tesham adhiko vishesho dharmen hina pashubhi samana. So these four are same in human beings and in animals also. These four, ahar, nidra, bhay, maithun. Dharam is the only one. See, dharmo hi tesham adhiko vishesho. Dharam is the only special thing. Without dharam, humans are also animals. And what do Vedas say about dharam? Ahimsa paramo dharma. So it's not only Rishi Patanjali is saying it, The Vedic seers are saying it. Ahimsa paramo dharma. So all emotions which spring from these four primitive urges, we need to control them also. Because the degree of control a person has over these emotions marks a being as either a human or animal. All these four urges play a key role in the lives of humans. But the faculty of discrimination, which is called vivek, that will serve balance. To have the effect on our actions. Rising above such tendencies by cultivating concern for others and deepening our sensitivity to the needs of others, even in the face of self-serving urges, elevates us from animal to human. And that's where we can cultivate higher virtues in us. What are those higher virtues? Selflessness, love, compassion. And with these higher virtues, we can move towards the divinity. And that is a goal of life. But we can become divine only after we have become fully human, though. And according to the yogic seers, the process of training and taming the animal within and transforming it to a human and then to divine starts with the practice of ahimsa, non-violence. Fear of death, the bhaya, which I mentioned earlier, is the greatest of all the fears. But when we try to look at it, when we try to understand this fear, the yogic philosophy has reached for a cause and found twins for this fear. Twin reasons, rag and dvesh, attachment and aversion. So human beings constantly strive to achieve what they like and to rid themselves of what they dislike. So all fear can be traced to attachment and aversion. And attachment and aversion can be traced to self-identity, I amness, or ego. So that's why our inclination to defend or attack has its roots in our fear of losing something that we believe to be integral of our identity. So this is all connected, as you can see. Just as a pain is a symptom of disease, violence is a symptom of fear. So that's why I brought this topic of fear in here. So symptom. Fever and violence are both indications of an internal struggle. That's why even these days when we go somewhere, they check our temperature. From a fever, they can judge what kind of a health we have. The more fearless we are, the more non-violent we become. Lord Krishna said, the first quality of a jnani, fearlessness. That's why jnani can never be violent. So it's not just Rishi Patanjali talked about ahimsa. Lord Krishna in Bhagavad Gita talked about ahimsa at several places as a virtue. Ahimsa. The freer a person is from fear, the more open that person is. A fearful person is sealed in his or her own little world. And that's why the person suffers from emptiness and loneliness. But a person who is free from fear is open and loving. Because this kind of a person has minimized his attachment and aversion. An outcome of that is free from tension and anxiety. Such a person remains tranquil in all situations. This power of non-violence, power of ahimsa, is beyond the grasp of an ordinary mind. Because this is very powerful. Non-violence puts us on a very firm ground. That's why this is the very first step. If the foundation is strong, then we can rise up. But if this foundation is cracking, we cannot. But mere belief in the principles of non-violence is not sufficient. Because even now, most of the people in the world believe in non-violence. But fights still happen, wars still happen, shootings still happen. This is because non-violence is an abstract principle to most of us. A passive belief rather than an active part of our lives. Because making it active requires living it in thought, speech, and actions. Not just actions alone. Speech also, thoughts also. See, just like soldiers are trained in precise methods of finding and striking military targets. So that's how the precise methods of practicing non-violence and targeting the injured areas of our lives at both the individual and collective level is needed. Skillfully, we got to learn how to be non-violent. We got to get rid of our violent tendencies. Because there's nothing inert about non-violence. It's not just a belief system. It's not just singing the poetry or writing the poetry about non-violence. Something active we need to do because it is a demanding way of life, supported by a very sound philosophy. And it has to be part of our spiritual practice. Sages, they want us to know the secret of this philosophy. The secret is don't hurt yourself and don't hurt others. And this is a very powerful statement. Don't hurt yourself. Even when we do yoga also, a simple yogic practice, yoga teacher will constantly tell you, know the difference between a stretch and a pain. Stretch is good, pain is not. Don't hurt yourself. So don't hurt yourself and don't hurt others. The sages, they have promised that when you become peaceful and happy, love and compassion will radiate from you. And people will wonder why you are so pleasant and loving. And this is all because of your non-violent thoughts, non-violent actions, non-violent speech. That is the power of non-violence. It really emerges from the hearts of the individuals. Then it pervades in the family, community, and society. Hopefully, one day it will be in the entire human race. But we have to learn to practice individually first. You and me. Practicing the principles of nonviolence systematically. Systematically. Some of the methods I'm going to tell you today. Number one, do not kill your conscience. How do we kill our conscience? When we continue to do things we do not want to do, and while postponing the things we want to do, there is an internal battle going on. The inner self is split. Your mind becomes scattered. And this confused mind cannot distinguish between the right and wrong. People with confused minds are vulnerable to emotional appeals. And that's how they join the mass movements without even considering what is the outcome. Why are they doing it? That's why the stability of the mind is needed. Clarity in our mind is needed. Do not just follow the crowd. Look at it. Why are you doing it? We saw that massive destruction in Washington, D.C. in January. If that was not a Ahimsa, then what is Ahimsa? It's a clear example. So, practice of non-violence begins with cultivating the conscious. So, that is the first step. Take time to listen to your heart. That's how we cultivate conscious. When you hear the voice of your heart, don't allow the mind to become frightened. Often mind wants to be selfish, egotistical, skeptical. Those are the mental emotions. Don't create mental interference in there. Fewer noises created by the mind, the clearer the voice of the heart. The clearer the voice of the heart, the closer you are to the truth. Another method you can use, do not condemn another's way of life. There are differences according to the geography, climate, natural resources, vegetation. It really gives us different way of life. We make a mistake when we use our own cultural standards to judge the values of another culture. That's a violence. Because we consider cultures with fewer material objects to be poor. We think they are ignorant. These people may be richer and wiser than we are with a lot of technology in terms of contentment, honesty, truthfulness, peace, and happiness. So do not condemn. Because one of the main causes of violence is the tendency to label others and pass judgments on their way of life. Especially when this is done with the intention of imposing our own ideas, our own value systems, our own lifestyles. We don't tolerate other people, and in the absence of tolerance, the impulses that lead to violence thrive. Tolerance is integral to nonviolence. Tolerance, whether it's at the individual level, in the family, between the families, in the communities, tolerance. Do not label others. Number 3, do not label others. We have a tendency to categorize individuals by identifying them with certain groups. We just make a blanket statement. These Americans always do this. Or Indian way. Or Spanish. Okay, so we just label people. That is how we create prejudices in our mind and jump to conclusion. Sweeping generalizations are absurd. They are dehumanizing at worst. Because all being in the Himalayas are not sages. And all people in America are not materialists. Because sometimes these prejudices are subtle, but they manifest in our thoughts, speech, and actions. And that's how this violence starts. So violence has its roots in prejudice and a habit of creating labels. Next one. Do not preserve the trash deposited by history. History, like any other area of life, is subject to interpretation and manipulation. There is no complete or accurate history of any group or series of events. We end up studying partial histories. And as a result, what happened? The Hindus, Jews, Muslims, Christians have nourished ill will towards each other. We keep on recalling and keep on recounting events of the past and try to punish the descendants of those we believe oppressed our ancestors. We must learn to forget the events while remembering the lessons of those events. See, lessons should not be forgotten. And our actions, current actions, should be based upon the lessons we learn. There's a big difference. Often we don't want to change our own behavior, but we just want to hold animosity towards those groups. We should remember that we all are members of the same species. We live on the same planet, consuming the same food and water, breathing the same air, walking into the light of the same sun. We share the same hunger, thirst, and fear. We said it is that we remember only the wars and the disputes. We often forget the good things. We forget the good feelings we share with each other. to get rid of Hinsa. Do not let conventional values override love, compassion, and nonviolence. It is important to recognize and honor the values of other communities, even when they are radically different than ours. Because value of universal love, compassion, and nonviolence are perennial. They supersede all other values. If the conventional values conflict with these universal values, the universal values take precedence. Remember that. And this universal values is called dharma. And Rishi Patanjali called it Mahavrat in those Yoga Sutras which we studied last Saturday. Mahavrat. These higher values are the means of expanding our consciousness. These values teach us to focus on the interest of all humanity rather than staying narrow-minded and identification with a smaller group. So that's why I said, do not let conventional values override these universal values. Another thing you can practice, and remember that individuals are an integral part of the same organism. We are all interconnected at one level or the other. When we study our scriptures, what does Bhagavad Puran say? Everything came out of a Brahma and after a lot of tapasya. Whether it was a Saptarishi or the Manu or the sons born out of the mind of a Brahma. So that is the source of creation. Source is only one. How can we fight? Because right now it may seem that we live independent lives. But this independence is supported by a larger interdependence. Right now we can see that, how globally we have gotten affected. Unrest in any enclave immediately spread across the globe. We are living through this right now. Just as we grind our teeth in our sleep for a reason, and normally the reason they say it's a stress, there must be a reason why a segment of humanity causes pain to the rest. So any outward expression of violence is a symptom of internal stress. We need to find out the cause for it and uproot the cause of the violence instead of creating more violence. Just like all the organs in the body must function together in a perfect coordination so that the person is healthy and there's a well-being of the organism. All segments of the human community must work together to promote the well-being of humanity. Remember, there's only one life force. We may be able to live separately at the physical level, but one life force runs through us all. Life force, pran, which is called in Sanskrit. Sure, we need food, we need water, but pran, which is being absorbed through the food also, through the water also, through the air also. The air we inhale travels through every cell of our bodies. It gathers not only the toxins, but also thoughts and feelings, returns to the lungs, and it exhaled through the nostrils. And then it gets assimilated in our body, in our system. And the same process is happening in everybody. It's a common in all of us. Hurting others is hurting ourselves because we are all connected. Loving others is loving ourselves. There is no difference between us. The same life force animates us all. Another thing you should remember always, hurting anyone means hurting God. According to each of the world's great spiritual traditions, all individuals are children of God. All individuals. From early childhood, we have heard the phrases, all men are brothers, love thy neighbor as thyself. We are all God's children. But we still condemn and injure others. Just as parents are saddened when their children fight and injure each other, so God must be very saddened watching us hurt each other. So remember, we are all God's children. The last point I would like to tell you, the law of the divine is the only auspicious law. Because we all know law and order are necessary if humans are to live together in groups. When we make rules, we set standards for our behavior. We must be careful to define the boundaries of our group and to respect the boundaries of other groups. And this law is called dharam. Dharam. So in the scriptures, the ground for performing one's duty is also called karma kshetra. So sure, we are doing our duties in our karma kshetra, but not forgetting the dharam though. Because sometimes in your duties, you may experience some conflict. But at the same time, we got to remember the higher duty though. And the highest duty is called dharma. Because external conflicts, they arise when in the performance of the duty, an individual or group, they just intersect with each other. There's a conflict. But whenever there's a conflict, remember the higher dharma, the universal dharma. Only then the problem can be solved. And this problem can be solved by the intellectuals alone. That's why the intellect has to be heightened and clarity has to be there. The intuitive wisdom, which is grounded in love, compassion, mutual understanding, and non-violence, is the best means to solve those conflicts also. Our intuitive wisdom is often buried under our selfishness. Because intuition we all have, but it is covered by the selfishness, ego, fear, and attachment. And that attachment is towards our own conventional values. We don't want any turmoil at the lower level, but we forget what is the bigger picture is. That's why the prayers like this, God, give me the wisdom to see that others have duties just as I have, is very powerful. The lesson from the Bhagavad Gita is the prayer to God, may I learn to delight in sacrificing my personal pleasures for the sake of my family. May I learn to sacrifice my family interests for the welfare of the community. And may I find the wisdom to sacrifice my communal interest for the welfare of my society. May I envision the ways of contributing to the welfare of the entire humanity, even if I have to sacrifice the welfare of my society. So that means keep the bigger picture in mind. That is a dharma. Instead of becoming narrow-minded, your interest or your family's interest or your community interest, take care of the bigger picture. The smaller will be taken care of. So by cultivating sacrifice, tolerance, fearless attachment, we become more non-violent. So these qualities we need to cultivate. Just only thinking about that I want to become non-violent is not going to work. Let me repeat, sacrifice. That means sacrificing your personal interest, your personal profit, your personal pleasure. Sacrifice. Tolerance, fearlessness, attachment. We become more non-violent. And it's not just one time. This is a practice. And by doing all this, we are following the first step on the ladder of yoga. Or I should say, first sub-step of the first step. And once we do this, you will see that it's easier to climb up on this ladder because you are creating a foundation which is so strong. It's a foundation. Just like a ladder, if the first step is strong, or a building, if the foundation is strong, there is no fear of having that building fall. So that's how important Ahimsa is, non-violence is. So it's not just a small little term, it's a big philosophy behind it. That's why the Vedas, the Bhagavad Gita, Yoga Sutras, everywhere we see this word, Ahimsa. Okay, so we got to start with ourselves first, individually. My words, my thoughts, my actions. Last 12 hours, how were they? Last 12 hours, because we forget what we did in the past. But right now, last 12 hours. Then plan the next 12 hours. Okay? So we got to do it actively, as I said earlier. We don't want to practice it passively. Actively, we got to look at it. Okay, introspect your own life. Okay, so I'll end my talk over here, and if you guys have any questions. We can have a discussion, and then at the end, we'll have a bhajan by, I think today is Rita Chawla's turn, if she's there. Okay, Jyoti.
We have Menka.
Namaste, Hershji.
Namaste, Menka.
Thank you. That was lovely. I personally have a hard time. I feel bad saying this, but as a yoga teacher and practitioner, I have a lot of yoga friends or teachers that do not practice vegetarianism. And I'm still friends with them, but I do pass slight judgment on them.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think they're not practicing ahimsa,
They're not, but if they are not, and by judging, you are not practicing it either. Okay, so your first duty is that you need to practice it. Okay, no judging. In time, maybe they will, but it's okay. You are more responsible for your life. Okay, pray for others. Hopefully they'll start practicing it, but no judging. If you judge them, you will definitely, you are putting yourself on the path of Ahimsa.
Right.
Okay, so it's good to acknowledge it. It's very brave of you to admit it. So, but but I'm not going to say it's okay. It's not okay.
Right.
We should not judge. Okay, yeah. But I'm glad that you are following at least the eating part. So thought-wise also you got to follow now.
Right.
Okay.
So Hershji, we learned a lot from this lecture. Going back to what Menka said, we don't judge, but because we have learned through you, or we have acquired knowledge of this ahimsa, when you see somebody else not practicing it, is it okay for us to kind of mention here or there and say, hey, have you heard about this? Or are you practicing this? Or this is a big thing on the path of yoga,
If you're in a position to tell them, like if you're a mother of a child who is younger than 18, sure, you can tell them without even asking them.
Okay.
But if it's a friend, co-worker, adult, unless they ask,
then it's not
otherwise you are imposing your beliefs.
Okay.
Okay, if they ask, definitely it's your duty to tell them. Okay, we got to see what is my relationship with this person. Okay, am I in a position to be a guide? So first yourself, you got to be situated firmly enough on the grounds. Then definitely, we should, but we should not just impose, because that's where the ill feeling starts.
Right.
And that is the breeding ground for violence.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
So,
thank you.
And this clarity comes when we are firmly established. We need to have this clarity. Sure, we got to spread this message. It's good virtue, universal virtue, but we first firmly establish ourselves in it. Okay.
Okay, great. Thank you. Neetu, have a question?
Yeah. Namaste, Hershji.
Namaste, Neetu.
There are so many things connected with this ahimsa. I cannot begin to even express how much ahimsa I have done. I'm still doing. And even though I have this nonviolence intention, I still fall in the trap of the reactor. And I realize that in myself, the one word that you said, very profound and is very deep. And I saw my guru, the basis of all these ill will, judgment, all comes from the lack of love within us, love in our heart. And I saw that in him, there was nothing but love. And in that foundation of love for, I don't know what was that love. Was it godly power, love, that full God who accepts us without flaws. And that I think about it. I would love to live in that footstep and be that love he was, and through love be non-judgmental. All these things I think we do uh, because we don't have love, and that without that love, we are programmed automatically. I think our thoughts starts to revolve with, when I see somebody, like Menka said, she's admitting that she is judging, and we all do that. I'm the guilty part of that. I mean, she realizes so early in her life, we didn't even realize it. It's so old.
But that's why, Neetu, I mentioned that don't worry about the last 40, 50 years.
Uh-huh.
Just last 12 hours, what did I do? Next 12 hours, just shorten that span and then start moving forward without this negative emotion.
Okay.
Okay? Because uh, because if we keep on going back,
Okay.
we'll never get where we want to get. It's almost like I always give the example of I mean, these days there are different kind of a vacuum cleaners, but you remember in old times, the vacuum cleaners with a bag in it? When we vacuumed, did we open the bag and see what did I catch in it?
No.
We threw it away.
Okay. Okay. Okay.
Okay, we don't want to go back and just dissect each and every action. Right
Okay.
now, just a small portion and then see, and then don't make the mistake of next 12 hours in that kind of an activity.
And if I fall in last 12 hours, which I did,
Uh-huh.
what do I do? Do I
Write it down.
okay. Okay.
Writing down, that way you're acknowledging it, just like Minka acknowledged.
Okay. Okay.
So she acknowledged in front of her 40 some people.
Okay. Okay.
But if we don't have that kind of a group, regular basis, if we don't have a person we can talk to, so I would say just have a journal, just write it down. When we write it down, we are taking the responsibility.
I see.
I did it. God give me the wisdom so that I don't do it again.
Okay.
God is always there to help us.
Okay.
We need to just extend our hand towards Him.
Hmm.
He wants us to cross this ocean of miseries.
Hmm.
Just like I said, a person who is committing this violence, whether it's a physical level, verbal level, emotional level, person is hurting.
Hurting inside.
There is a hurt inside, whether a person is familiar with that or not. You cannot do something outside unless there is a seed of that growing inside.
What if we recognize that I'm hurting inside? How do we fix that hurt?
Okay, it all depends where that hurt is coming from.
Okay.
Sometimes maybe you need to talk to somebody.
Hmm.
Sometimes it could be a counseling, sometimes it could be a family meeting, sometimes it could be just resting a little or praying to God. It all depends.
Okay.
Okay, but we need to take care of ourselves.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay,
Thank you.
so but good point though. Need to thank you. Yes, Jyoti. Anybody else?
I think we're done. Oh, sorry.
Wow. Okay. All right.
Yeah.
So
Ritaji?
do we have Rita Chawla today in the class?
Yes.
Okay. All right.
Ritaji?
Yes. Namaste, Hershji.
Namaste, Rita. If you can sing a bhajan for us, we'll appreciate that.
Okay.